Greetings. This is Mr. Fowler for today's session number 5 for 3001 English 111, also known as College Study Skills. I'm so happy that you can join me again this week. We've got a whole host of things to discuss today, all regarding the ideas surrounding professors, tasks, and you. So let's go ahead and start today, and we'll get right into our PowerPoints. So as you can see, today's focus is on professors, tasks, and you. And that's going to require a little bit of a review from last week. Actually, this goes back 2 weeks ago, all the way to chapter 2. Okay, let me start the slideshow. Slideshow from the beginning, of course. So this week's chapter is a little bit interesting for 2 reasons. Number one, it is the culmination of discussions that we've had for chapters 2 and 3 and the new content for this week, chapter 4. It will constitute the basis of your second weekly quiz, which is uploaded and available for you on the Desire to Learn website. Additionally, we're going to talk today a little bit about what professors do, what types of professors you may encounter here at Kish or throughout your college career, and what that might mean for you as a student. You might need to tailor some of your ideas and expectations of a class and the types of tasks assigned by these various levels of professors according to the context in which you find yourself approaching that particular course. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're also going to discuss the types of tasks that professors assign in college courses and talk about the various levels of understanding that you might need to access or apply when responding to these questions. So let's go ahead and begin. Remember that one of the 4 factors that influence learning are tasks. Obviously, you've got the characteristics of the learner, specifically those elements about your motivation, about your will, about the knowledge that you bring to a given class or course. All will influence your learning experience in that class. Today, we're going to spend a lot of time, though, with the second factor, tasks. Those things, basically, the stuff, to use some very non-academic terminology, that professors have you do to grasp some of the key concepts within the course. Texts that you're assigned may include, of course, textbooks, but also videos, articles that you might be assigned to read in addition to other readings from your essential text. And then, of course, the learning strategies that you employ in order to get the most out of your experience and learn actively, whether that's simply reading actively, to preview, annotate and highlight, to take notes, whether it's engaging in active learning through your study sessions with others, or changing your routine to adjust to a specific class and its required style of study. Those are all learning strategies, and they too influence not only the way that you learn actively, but how you learn within a college context. Today, when we focus on tasks, I'm going to suggest something that your authors, Oljink and Holschuk, suggest to be true as well, which is that much of your success in college rests on your ability to interpret the tasks assigned to you. All right, so first of all, our authors begin to break down chapter 4 by asking questions like, what is a professor? In other words, what does a professor do? What do they want you to do? And how are you supposed to do it? Well, first of all, let's ask a question about Mr. Fowler. What kind or what level of professor am I? And there are 3 different levels of professors. Most of the time, in your early courses, sort of your prerequisite courses, you may encounter assistant professors. Assistant professors have PhDs and at least master's degrees. So a BA or an MA or a BSA for business, or it's not BSA. Anyway, MBA rather, Masters of Business Accounting, or some advanced degree. Now, an advanced degree is simply academic speak for a degree that goes beyond the standard bachelor or associate level degree. Here at Kish, with some exceptions, you can earn a associate degree, which is a 2-year degree for most community colleges. There are some programs that we offer through Kishwaukee College that can result in an advanced degree beyond an associate's, but most of the time an associate's level degree is what you'll find at most community colleges, like Highland or Rock Valley College, or I'm trying to think of other area colleges, but you at least earn an associate level degree at those colleges. A lot of business colleges like Rockford Career College or Judson, they also offer an associate's degree. If you go to a 4-year college or university like NIU or SIU or Champaign-Urbana, something like that, or the University of Chicago itself, you'll usually, after a 4-year period, graduate with what's called a bachelor's degree. Generally, it's a BA or a BS. Sometimes if you're in nursing, you get a BSN. But those kinds of degrees are very effective mainstream college degrees. Anything beyond that is qualified as a master's degree. So, for example, Mr. Fowler has a master's degree. In fact, my focus is in literature and film. That means when I started way back in 2008, I was an assistant level professor, which basically means that I was sort of placed within the college structure in such a way as to maximize my talents, especially for early and introductory level students. As you can see in the notes here, assistant professors are newly minted, meaning that they're new to the entire teaching perspective. They probably start as an assistant professor most of the time and maintain that status for at least 3 years, Now, one of the other things I've noted about professors is that it's very dissimilar from high school training. So if you're a high school instructor, which I also used to be, you have quite a bit of training that you have to get done, including an unpaid internship, basically, which is called your practical teaching experience. That's where you have a chance to fumble, make mistakes, learn, adapt, and become better at being a high school level teacher. There are a lot of hoops to jump through and bells and whistles that you have to chime in order to attain that status. However, someone with an advanced degree could find themselves entering a college classroom with none of that training. They really just hand you a version of a syllabus and tell you, best of luck. You have some training, you have some learning on job to do. So luckily with Mr. Fowler, or I don't know, maybe you wouldn't consider it fortunate, but I think most of my students would say they consider it fortunate that I have some teacher training, that I bring a certain design and practice to the way I set up a course. Most of your professors who are assistant professors, unless they've had a couple of years on site, you get what you get. All right, now, associate professors may have published research in their field, or they may have participated in specific service projects or committees at the college, or they may just have attained a status after so many years of accumulated work. So for example, Mr. Fowler is an associate professor, which answers our major question right over here. What level of professor am I? Is Mr. Fowler? I am an associate professor. I have 10 years currently of experience. So I am a long in the tooth associate professor. Okay. Then you have, of course, full professors who have sustained full exemplary teaching, research, and or service to the college for several years. I'm getting to the point where I'm either going to have to become a full professor once again. I was a full professor at a different college before I started here at Kish, or I'll have to make other arrangements. We'll see what the college says. Right now, the state of Illinois is, and I'm sure this is no shock to any of you, it's struggling financially, the entire state. And that, of course, is reflected in the amount of funding available to community level colleges and universities. So they're not hiring as frequently as they used to. So right now I'm at an associate professor. We'll see if something changes in the next couple of years. Hopefully it will. Okay, so obviously no matter what level of professor you end up with, they're going to assign you things to do in the class. Our text refers to these types of activities as tasks. Now, typically, the types of tasks that you encounter will take the form of a test, a paper, or a project. In this class, there's a lot of information that we have to process. And the chapters that we read about this information are relatively short and compact. So rather than, a quiz, you will have some other opportunities to write essays, to revise some of those essays to get yourself used to that process if you haven't done so already. But there's not a whole lot of other tasks that we have to assign because this is basically a short and quick text that introduces elements into your life in short chunks or chapters of information. Now I've got a couple of things that I'll be adding in, maybe some additional readings and videos that might help to enhance the overall process. But even if we were meeting in person, there's a limit on what I can introduce until we read it, until we have a discussion like this one, or have a session rather like this one. So the tasks here are going to be threefold. You're going to have one essay assignment. Actually, you'll have an essay assignment and a short paper for your final exam. You're going to have several, 8, I believe, weekly quizzes, and you're going to have weekly discussion forums. Those are all tasks that you have to complete. There's a midterm exam in there too, just to spice things up a little bit. So you've got 1 exam, 2 essays, 8 quizzes, and 15, thereabouts, I think, weekly discussion questions to respond to. So those are your tasks for this course. Now your tasks might vary from one course to the other. For example, I typically teach English courses when I'm not teaching college success skills. Most of the assignments in there are basically broken down into 2 categories: weekly discussion questions and essays. That's what the design of those courses is for. In your basic mathematics classes, you're probably going to have weekly quizzes, a midterm, and a final exam. They may or may not refer to the totality of the semester. Depends on your instructor and the tasks they deem most necessary for your learning. Other courses, specifically when you get into your advanced courses, like if you're pursuing nursing or you're pursuing agriculture or automotive, those kinds of courses will offer a whole host of other types of tasks, the likes of which I can't even guess at because that's not my field of expertise. But whatever the task is, you have to take certain steps and a certain degree of responsibility for, 1, understanding what the task is asking you to do, and then number 2, understanding what it is your professor expects. So if we can go back to the share for just a moment. Again, typically you'll find tests, papers, or projects to be the core of the majority of the courses that you're going to take, especially for your prerequisite courses. When it comes to a particular task that you're approaching, try to get as much specific information as possible. That means it's not out of the ordinary for you as a student to ask to see a rubric, to ask to see how it is you're going to be evaluated. And if possible, if there's a pre-existing example from another student showcasing a successful attempt at that project, paper, or test. Many times you may even have instructors who will give you a study guide or preview the test itself in advance of taking the test. Now, various tasks that you approach will task you in different ways. They'll challenge you to pursue a different level of thinking. The authors of our text break this stratagem down, this system, if you will, down into a series of 6 different levels of thinking. It's frequently referred to as Bloom's taxonomy. And as you can see here, includes the idea of knowledge-based tasks, comprehension-based tasks, and the application or analysis of those tasks. You may also be questioned from one time to the next as to whether or not you can synthesize or draw constituent pieces of knowledge together or evaluate a particular text or a piece of writing or analysis that requires you to explain what it is you've learned. So let's break each of these down. Like I said, 6 levels require a little bit of individual focus. The first one is the idea of knowledge. So knowledge is a lot of memory work, hearkening back to what we thought about in chapter 2. This is the basic regurgitation and memorization of key data, including dates, events, key ideas, and maybe the definitions of bold-faced terms that you might encounter when reading through a chapter or 2 in a textbook. Usually you can detect when your knowledge is being tested by looking at specific question words such as define or describe identify, match, name, and then identifying the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, and how. Comprehension questions are a little bit more complex, and I really like the graphic on this one because they break it down a lot nicer, I believe, or I feel, than our textbook does. They explain knowledge versus comprehension. So knowledge, if you want to visualize this, is information that's stored in your mind in the same way that information gets stored into a filing cabinet. There's all sorts of information in your head, and it's broadly categorized. Comprehension is what would exist within the files themselves inside that larger storage area. So, for example, when you're being tasked with comprehending something, your instructor is really probing to see whether or not you grasp the meaning and can explain the process. Can you summarize or group things together? Can you make a prediction or infer knowledge based on the cursory comprehension that you have gained? Again, there are specific question words that usually cue up or preview that a comprehension style question is headed your way. These kinds of words can include several of the very tasks you're assigned with a comprehension level of thinking. Summarize, describe, interpret, distinguish, or defend, explain, discuss, or predict, right? You've got some knowledge already learned, so now that you have knowledge with comprehension, you expand and showcase your ability to use that knowledge. The next level, of course, is application. And I selected this image because I think too many times we miss out on the fact that a screen like this one, which most of us have on our phones, is filled with little gadgets called applications. And that's a good metaphor for this level of thinking. With application, you're actually using material to solve a problem, explain a rule, concept, or theory. And for example, one of the apps that I use is right here. It's in the second row, about 4 over from the left-hand side. It's the calculator app. I always get such a bang out of instructors who used to say, you know, you shouldn't be too reliant on a calculator. You won't carry a calculator around with you in your pocket. Well, to their shock and dismay, not only do I carry a pocket calculator with me most of the time, but it's part of a larger device that many of us deem, you know, essential to our daily living. Food for thought. But again, question words that you might see when you're being asked to apply knowledge would include the term itself, apply, but also demonstrate, calculate, illustrate, solve, or give an example. That's applying that first level of thinking knowledge by actually using it to complete a task. And here we have, of course, Charlie Day in this famous clip from Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Analysis. That's bringing everything together to seek out a pattern or explain or analyze a large topic, and to illustrate that you have an understanding of how these various constituent pieces connect to the whole. So with an analysis, you're thinking about how to understand the organization of parts. And this could include tasks like clarifying, concluding, or recognizing meaning. So I want to go full screen for a bit because one of your first essay assignments is the self-assessment essay. So when you're going to analyze or assess your own abilities as a student, now that we've gotten through the first portion of the class, which and the text, which is ideas focused on who you are, understanding your limits and your skills as a individual learner, it's time that you can reflect on what your abilities are and how successful you can be, number one. And number two, you can also think and about and consider what deficits you might have, and then take the next step. What are some strategies that you've learned about thus far that you could use to address the deficits in your learning capabilities? What could you do to enhance your already present skills to make up for or even just address some deficits in your learning style? It'll be a great opportunity to actively assess our own perspectives about education and also write a little bit. Help me get to know you that much more as a student so that I can tailor the rest of the class to your interests and needs. That's the theory, at least. Okay, let's wrap up. Okay, so we've talked about an analysis. Synthesis is drawing new ideas together and relating knowledge from multiple sources of information. You will probably see suggested strategy words like combine, create, design, rewrite, generalize, compose, integrate, or formulate. And I used an example here of a note-taking method called bubbling, where you talk about the constituent issues surrounding a larger theme, and you draw them in to this red center bubble, establishing a coherent web or theme of ideas that you can Sorry about that. Little glitch. Okay, continuing on. This is a way for you, this is a way for you to synthesize or combine your ideas together in one cohesive thought. Lastly, we have evaluation, which relies on the ability to make choices based on evidence. Question words that cue up an evaluative question might be words like support, or include terms such as judge or discriminate, assess, recommend, measure, or even conclude. So the reason that I brought these up is because next week we're going to prep for the self-assessment essay, and then we're going to jump around in terms of the context of the course. We're not going to continue on to chapter 5. We're actually going to jump ahead to test-taking skills so that you can learn how to apply the different levels of understanding and meaning to individual questions for specific tests and exams. Now, most of the time, exams will have a mix of all of these various types of elements. But being aware of what's being asked of you can help you determine the best way to answer the question, and perhaps even eliminate some suggestions that might lead you toward an alternate path of understanding, or even just confuse you. Okay. So one of the things that you're going to have to make sure that you do as a student is to get information about your tasks. And the book here, well, the book lists, and I've duplicated here, a whole host of different ideas that they suggest you adhere to in order to get the best information about tasks. Now, all of these are great recommendations that I fully endorse. But the first is something I'm going to harp on just a little bit. In the book, they have a practical example. Some students think that if there's a day to be skipped, or if they have to sacrifice one day, it's the first day. Because sometimes a common phrase or description that I've heard is that all that happens is the instructor hands out the syllabus. He or she discusses, the Blackboard or Canvas applications. Here it's called Desire to Learn. And then they dismiss. They tell you about the textbooks. They tell you about what their plans are. They get out of the syllabus, and they're done. It's like a waste. It's like 15 minutes sometimes. And I have to admit, when I went to school as a student myself, that happened a lot on the first day. But I would argue that there is a disconnect in the student experience, especially the first year college student experience, with time spent versus relevant information. Looking back, I now understand that most of the time, the reason that the course was shorter was because the information that was delivered was densely packed, and that the instructor knew time would be better spent if they allowed the student to sort of decompartmentalize all of the materials that were discussed in the syllabus and the initial lecture. Plus, sometimes you might just go into a class, look at a syllabus, become a deer in the headlights, or just get a bad vibe from an instructor, and then you still have time to adjust your schedule or change your course of study. So I would recommend that, given all of that, you try to attend not just every session, but make sure you attend the first session. That would be the worst one to miss in my experience. So that's probably the most important class, is the first session, especially as we return to on-campus courses, hopefully in the spring, but I can't, foretell what's going to happen. But if we do return to in-campus courses in the future, try not to ever miss the first course. That's, like I said, that oftentimes is the most important course and really sets up the structure of the class and the objectives that you're going to inculcate long-term over the course of the entire semester. Okay, that's Mr. Fowler's soapbox for today. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. Obviously, attend each class if possible. Write information down. When you have questions, consult your syllabus first. Try to take notes and pay attention when tasks and tests are being discussed. Oftentimes, instructors will actually hand out example tests in like a different or funky color sheet, and then they'll collect them back, and then when you get the test, it's the same questions with maybe just a variation on how they are sequenced or something like that. I've done that many times. If possible, ask a former student about how they completed a given task. Now, this is my first time with this particular course, so I don't have other students to refer you to. I have examples of other students about similar activities, but you won't be able to do that with Mr. Fowler. However, there's nothing wrong with asking a student who you know has taken this class what their experience is like. Okay, there was one last thing that I cut off a little early. Sorry about that. And it's just ways to get information about a task with former students. Understand that not every instructor will be the same. So they may have said that they had a relatively good experience, but they didn't like the instructor, or they liked the instructor, but the course was not to their liking. Again, that's not going to help you that much, but ask about the tasks that they had to complete. Ask about what they retained from the course after they'd exited it. Those kinds of points can be valuable and worth your time and effort to explore. Okay, that's all for today. This is Mr. Fowler signing off. I hope that you found this material engaging and interesting. We have a week 2 quiz for you to complete, 20 points, 16 questions. And I also have a weekly discussion question for you to respond to this week. Take just 15 minutes, put 15 minutes aside in your week and think about this task, the self-assessment essay. What do you feel you need to do to be successful with this essay? What additional questions or concerns do you have before we begin pre-writing next week? And what do you need to know about how you'll be evaluated for this project? 3 kinds of questions for you to think about and respond to, and engage with other students in some active discussion and learning. I'll be checking in again with you on Wednesday. Until then, I bid you a good day.